Jack Morgan lived on a small ranch far from any town or noisy place. His ranch sat in the middle of wide open land where the wind carried the smell of dry grass and the sun painted long shadows across the ground each evening. Jack had lived alone for many years. He did not have family nearby, and he did not often visit town unless he needed supplies. The quiet life suited him, but it also made him feel deeply alone sometimes. The only living soul that truly stayed with him every single day was his faithful dog, Rusty. Rusty was not just a pet to Jack, he was his closest companion. Rusty followed him everywhere, from the early morning walk to the barn, to the long rides across the ranch as Jack checked the cattle. Rusty seemed to understand Jack's words even when they were simple greetings like, "Come on, boy," or "Let's ride." Jack would often talk to Rusty when he felt the weight of silence on his shoulders. Sometimes he would tell Rusty about the weather, sometimes about stories he heard long ago, and sometimes he just spoke so he did not feel like the world had forgotten him. Rusty always listened, always wagged his tail, and always stayed close. One morning, the sky looked different. There were dark clouds forming far on the horizon, moving slowly in the direction of the ranch. The wind carried a slight cold touch, the kind that warned a person that a storm might come before the day ended. Jack walked around the ranch, checking the fences, the roof edges, and anything that might need attention before the wind became too strong. Rusty usually stayed by his side during mornings like this. But on this particular day, Jack noticed something strange. Rusty was nowhere to be seen. At first, Jack did not worry. Rusty sometimes explored the fields nearby, sniffing trails left by rabbits or wandering close to the creek where fresh water flowed. Jack called out his name a few times. "Rusty. Come on, boy." His voice traveled across the open land but returned without any answering bark. Jack shrugged lightly and continued working, thinking Rusty would return on his own once he finished his little adventure. But as the hours passed, Jack's mind began to feel heavier. He kept looking at the gate, at the path near the barn, and toward the small hill where Rusty often liked to climb. Each time Jack looked, there was no sign of the dog. The wind grew stronger, pushing dust across the ground, and distant thunder whispered through the darkening sky. By noon, Jack felt uneasy. Rusty had never stayed away this long, not without giving some sign or some bark from a distance. Jack put on his coat, stepped outside, and called again, louder this time. "Rusty, here, boy. Rusty." His voice echoed, but silence returned. Only the wind answered him, carrying a lonely sound across the land. Worry settled deeper in Jack's chest. He decided to ride out and search. He saddled his horse quickly, slipped a rope around the saddle horn, and set off across the fields. His eyes moved everywhere along the ground, toward the creek, across the hills, and near the rocky areas where Rusty sometimes chased birds. But the land seemed empty. Even the usual small animals were hiding because the storm continued to grow closer. Jack rode for hours. He called Rusty's name until his throat felt dry. Every time he thought he heard a faint sound, he stopped his horse and listened closely. But each time it turned out to be the wind or a rustle of dry grass. As the sky turned even darker, Jack felt a painful tightness in his chest. Rusty was more than a dog. Losing him felt like losing the one friend he could always count on. Rain began to fall light at first, then heavier. The horse pushed forward carefully through the uneven ground. But even the horse seemed unsure of where to go next. Jack's clothes soaked quickly, but he hardly noticed. His only thought was Rusty. Where could the dog have gone? Was he hurt somewhere? Was he trapped or stuck? Jack imagined too many things, and all of them worried him more. After searching until the sun dipped low behind the dark clouds, Jack finally turned back toward the ranch. He could not see clearly anymore, and the storm was becoming too strong to keep riding safely. He hoped that maybe, just maybe, Rusty would be waiting by the porch when he reached home. But when Jack arrived, the ranch was empty. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof. The wind blew against the windows, and the sky rumbled above. Jack stood still for a moment, letting the rain soak his face. The emptiness of the ranch felt heavier than ever. He called Rusty's name one last time before stepping inside, his voice tired and filled with sadness. Inside the small house, Jack lit a lantern and sat by the window with his coat still wet. He listened for any sound outside, a bark, footsteps, anything but the storm drowned out all hope. It was the first night in years that Rusty was not inside the warm house, curled up at the foot of Jack's bed. Jack barely slept that night. Every few hours, he stepped outside with a lantern, shielding it from the wind, and looked around, but the darkness only showed the moving shadows of trees and the glistening rain. Jack felt helpless. Rusty had always been strong, clever, and brave, but the storm was no small challenge. The night stretched long, filled with worry and silence. The next morning came with no good news. Rusty did not return. Jack searched again when the storm slowed, walking across muddy ground and checking every familiar spot, but there were no paw prints, no broken branches, and no signs of movement. The land looked as if Rusty had simply vanished. Jack felt a painful ache in his heart, a deep sadness that made the ranch feel colder and emptier than it had ever been. For 2 long days, Jack kept searching whenever he could, even when he stopped to drink water or eat a small meal. His worry never left him. He thought of all the years Rusty had stayed beside him through loneliness and storms. Through hot summers and cold winters, Rusty had always been there, always loyal, always wagging his tail with warmth in his eyes. The idea of losing him felt unbearable. Jack wondered if he had failed his loyal friend somehow. The second night settled in quietly, though the clouds still hung heavy. Jack sat on his porch with his lantern beside him. His clothes were dry, but his heart was tired. The land around him whispered with the sound of the wind passing through dry grass. Everything felt too still, too empty. As he stared into the distance, Jack whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Where are you, Rusty?" He lowered his head, feeling the weight of loneliness more deeply than ever before. Rusty's absence was not just the loss of a dog, it was the loss of a piece of Jack's quiet world. A world that had always felt a little brighter because of Rusty's simple presence. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, letting the night air cool his face. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure: he would never stop hoping that Rusty would come home again. He would keep waiting, no matter how long it took. Little did Jack know that Rusty was not truly lost. Something unexpected, important, and life-changing had happened out there in the vast land. Something that would soon bring Rusty back to the ranch, but not alone. The second morning after Rusty disappeared was slower and heavier than the one before. Jack woke up early, as he always did, but his heart felt tired. The house was too quiet without Rusty's paws tapping across the wooden floor. There was no warm greeting, no wagging tail, no bright eyes waiting for him to open the door. Jack walked outside, hoping he might see Rusty running from the fields. But the land lay still and empty. Jack stood on the porch for a long moment, letting the early sunlight touch his face. The storm from the past days had passed, leaving the sky fresh and bright. The air smelled clean, and drops of water still hung from the leaves. On any other day, Jack might have admired the calm beauty of the morning, but today he only felt the growing weight of loss. He stepped down from the porch and walked slowly toward the barn. Inside, the horses stirred softly, sensing Jack's sadness even if they could not understand it. He stroked the neck of his main horse and sighed, whispering a quiet prayer for Rusty's safety. It was all he could do now. He had searched the land until he had no strength left. He had walked through mud and climbed hills, even when the wind pushed against him. Still, he had found nothing. Jack spent the morning fixing small things around the ranch, but his mind kept drifting back to Rusty. Every time he heard a sound from the fields, his heart jumped a little. Sometimes it was a cow moving. Sometimes it was the wind brushing against the grass. Each sound gave him a moment of hope that quickly faded. As the sun climbed higher, Jack finally gave up on pretending he could focus on chores. He sat down on the porch again, leaned back, and looked out toward the hills. He remembered the first day he found Rusty. The dog had been a small, skinny puppy wandering near the creek. Jack had picked him up and carried him home. Since then, Rusty had grown into a strong, loyal friend who was always by his side. Thinking about that memory made Jack's chest ache even more. Hours passed slowly. Jack's thoughts moved from hope to sadness and back again. The stillness of the land began to feel almost painful. The ranch was usually peaceful, but without Rusty, the silence felt wrong. The loneliness felt deeper, sharper. Jack rubbed his tired eyes and wondered what he would do if Rusty never came back. Then, just as his hope started to fade completely, something made Jack sit up straight. He thought he heard a faint sound, a bark, soft and distant. At first he wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks on him. He stood up quickly and listened harder, holding his breath. Nothing. Just whined. But a moment later, he heard it again. This time, it was louder, clearer, unmistakable. A bark. Jack's heart leapt. He stepped off the porch quickly and walked toward the open land. His eyes searched every distant shape, every moving shadow. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then his breath caught in his chest. Far away, moving slowly across the field, was a shape he recognized immediately. A dog familiar in size and walk. Rusty. Jack blinked, hardly believing what he saw. Rusty was coming home. Relief washed over him like cool water on a hot day. He started walking forward, then running. "Rusty," he called out loudly, his voice filled with happiness and disbelief. Rusty barked again, tail wagging weakly. But as Rusty got closer, Jack noticed something else. Someone was walking beside the dog. It was a woman. She was thin, tired, and moving slowly, as if each step required effort. Jack slowed down, trying to understand what he was seeing. Rusty stayed close to her, guiding her carefully, stopping whenever she stopped. It was almost as if Rusty had taken responsibility for her. When they came nearer, Jack could see the woman clearly. Her clothes were dusty and worn. Her face looked tired, and her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had suffered more than the storm outside. Her hair hung loosely around her shoulders, and she held a small bundle in her hands. Rusty reached Jack first. The dog pressed his head against Jack's legs, tail moving but not with the usual strength. Jack knelt down, hugging Rusty tightly, feeling an overwhelming mixture of joy and relief. "Where have you been, boy?" Jack whispered softly, his eyes warm with emotion. Rusty licked his hand and looked up at him, then turned his head toward the woman, as if telling Jack not to forget her. Jack slowly rose to his feet and faced the woman. She looked hesitant, unsure if she should step forward. Jack, noticing her discomfort, spoke gently. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman gave a small nod, though her eyes showed how much she was struggling. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke, carrying a quiet strength. "I was lost. For 2 days. The storm took my horse. I could not find my way." Jack listened carefully. The woman continued. "Your dog. He found me when I could not walk much longer. He stayed with me. He saved me." Jack looked down at Rusty again, his heart filling with pride and gratitude. Rusty had not run away. He had gone to help someone in trouble. The woman spoke her name softly. "Nalina." She explained that she belonged to a nearby Apache community. She had been traveling when the storm hit suddenly and separated her from her horse. She had walked through the rain and wind until she could walk no more. That was when Rusty found her near a dry creek bed, weak and alone. Jack guided her gently toward the porch. "Come inside," he said. "You need rest, and food, and warmth." Nalina hesitated for a moment, but Rusty walked beside her, giving her the quiet reassurance she needed. She stepped onto the porch, and Jack opened the door to let her in. The warmth of the house welcomed them all. Inside, Jack found a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. He brought her water, and she drank slowly. He offered her a seat, and Rusty sat beside her, keeping close. Jack prepared a simple meal and placed it in front of her. As she ate, he watched her carefully, noticing the way her hands trembled from exhaustion. She had clearly been through a difficult ordeal. When she finished eating, Nalina finally spoke again. her voice steadier now. Your dog. He did not leave me. Even when I could not move fast. He barked until I followed. He kept pushing me to stand. Jack smiled softly and rested his hand on Rusty's head. He's always been a good boy, he said quietly. Nalina's eyes softened as she looked at Rusty. He has a brave heart. As the evening settled, Jack noticed how tired she was. Nalina nodded gratefully. Rusty stayed near her as Jack prepared a small space for her to sleep. When she finally lay down, exhaustion pulled her into a deep rest. Rusty curled up at her side, as if guarding her through the night. Jack stood quietly for a long time, watching them both. The house no longer felt empty. Rusty had returned, and he had brought someone who needed help. The loneliness that had filled Jack's heart began to lift, replaced by a warmth he had not felt in years. He whispered softly, "Good job, Rusty." Outside, the wind carried a peaceful sound across the ranch. Jack knew that something important had happened, a moment that would change everything. He did not yet know how, but he could feel it in the quiet strength of the night. The morning after Nalina arrived at the ranch began with a calm silence. The storm of the past days had cleared completely, leaving the sky bright and open. Sunlight touched the ground slowly, warming the cold earth. Jack stepped outside early, as he always did, but this time, something felt different. The ranch did not feel as empty as before. There was a gentle sense of company in the air, something he had not felt in a long time. Inside the small house, Rusty slept beside Nalina, who was still resting, recovering from her long struggle through the storm. Jack watched them quietly from the doorway. Rusty had barely left her side since he brought her. It was clear that he felt responsible for her safety. The sight warmed Jack's heart. For the first time in days, Jack felt a small spark of hope. Rusty had returned, and he was safe. But more than that, he had brought someone who truly needed help. Jack stepped back outside and fed the horses, letting them stretch and breathe in the fresh morning air. As he worked, he found himself thinking about Nalina, her courage, her calm strength, and the quiet way she had spoken the night before. She had endured fear, cold, exhaustion, and loneliness. Yet she remained steady. When Jack returned inside, Nalina was awake. She sat up slowly, her eyes still heavy with tiredness but clearer than before. Rusty wagged his tail gently, happy to see her awake. Jack smiled kindly. "Did you sleep well?" Nalina nodded. "Yes. Thank you. I have not slept this peacefully in many days." Jack placed a plate of warm food in front of her. She ate slowly, each bite bringing a little more color back to her face. Rusty sat beside her, watching quietly. "Your ranch is peaceful," Nalina said after a while. Her voice was soft, but stronger than the day before. Jack nodded. "It's quiet out here. Sometimes too quiet. But it's home." Nalina glanced at him with thoughtful eyes. "Quiet can be good. Quiet can heal." Her words touched something deep in Jack. He had lived with silence for so long that he almost forgot it could bring comfort rather than loneliness. For the first time, he saw his own life through someone else's eyes, and it felt different. Once Nalina finished eating, she tried to stand. Jack moved forward to help her, but she steadied herself. She was determined to move on her own, even though her body was still tired. She stepped outside slowly, breathing in the fresh air as if it carried healing with it. Rusty followed her closely. He never let her take a step without being near her. Jack walked behind them, watching her quietly. She stopped near the fence and looked out across the open land. Her eyes studied the horizon, the hills, and the gentle curve of the creek in the distance. She stood there with a calm expression, as if remembering something or silently thanking the world for her safety. "You have a beautiful place," she said softly. Jack smiled a little. "I'm glad you think so." They stayed outside for a while, letting the warm sunlight ease the chill that had settled in their bones from the recent storm. Rusty sniffed around the yard, but he always returned to stand near both of them. During the next few days, Nalina continued to rest and grow stronger. Jack prepared simple meals for her and made sure she had everything she needed. She moved carefully at first, but each day she regained more strength. She helped with small tasks, collecting water, sweeping dust from the porch, and folding blankets. She didn't do too much, but she insisted on helping in whatever way she could. Jack noticed that she had a quiet rhythm to her movements. She moved with respect for everything around her, every tool, every piece of wood, every bowl she touched. She treated the ranch as if she were visiting a sacred place. Jack appreciated that deeply. In the evenings, they sat outside together. The sky turned golden, then pink, then dark blue as the stars began to appear. The calm of the night wrapped around them gently. Jack usually did not talk much, but having Nalina nearby made it easier for him to speak. He told her about the ranch, about how his father had once lived here, and about the difficulties of living alone for so many years. Nalina listened closely, her eyes calm. Then she shared pieces of her own life. She spoke about her people, their traditions, their belief in harmony with nature. She had lost someone close to her months before, and she had been trying to find peace ever since. She traveled often, searching for signs, searching for meaning, searching for strength to move forward. Jack listened with a steady heart. He did not interrupt her. He understood that the quiet honesty in her voice came from a deep place within her. The more they spoke, the more Jack felt a connection forming, something gentle, something slow, something real. Rusty always stayed close during their conversations. Sometimes he lay at Nalina's feet. Sometimes he rested his head on Jack's knee. It felt as if Rusty understood that the two of them needed company just as much as they needed peace. One afternoon, Nalina offered to help with the horses. Jack hesitated, unsure if she was strong enough yet. But she assured him with a gentle smile. "I know horses well. I will be careful." She moved slowly to the barn and held out her hand toward one of the horses. The horse sniffed her hand, then relaxed. Jack watched with surprise. She had a natural calmness that animals trusted immediately. She brushed the horse gently, speaking to it in a soft voice. Jack found himself watching her more than he watched the horses. The sun lit her face, making her look peaceful and graceful. For a moment he wondered how someone who had endured such hardship could still carry so much peace within her. As the days passed, Jack realized how much her presence changed the ranch. The house no longer felt too quiet. The evenings no longer felt empty. Even the mornings felt brighter. He found himself looking forward to hearing her voice, seeing her smile, and sharing simple moments with her. But Jack also knew that she could not stay forever. Nalina's people were waiting for her. She had her own journey, her own life, her own responsibilities. He tried not to think about the day she would leave, but the thought came quietly to him at times, like a shadow passing through his heart. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Nalina spoke softly. "I will need to return soon." Jack felt the words land heavily inside him, but he nodded. "I know. You have helped me more than you understand." She continued. "I was weak. I was scared. I did not know if I would survive. Your dog found me. You gave me safety. I will never forget it." Jack swallowed, his voice steady but quiet. "I'm just glad you're safe." She looked at him, her expression warm. "Your heart is kind. This place holds peace because of you." Jack looked out toward the setting sun, trying to control the feeling growing inside him. He had lived so quietly for so many years that he had forgotten what it felt like to care so deeply about someone. Nalina's presence had changed him, even if she didn't know it. Rusty barked softly, as if sensing the emotions in the air. He nudged Jack's hand, then touched his nose gently to Nalina's arm. They both smiled at Rusty's simple way of reminding them that they were not alone in their feelings. That night, as they sat together under the stars, Jack realized something important. Nalina had lost her way during the storm, but she had also found something: safety, friendship, and trust. And Jack, who had been lonely for years, had found something too: a reason to feel alive again. Their bond was quiet but strong, formed through shared kindness and unexpected moments, and though neither of them said it aloud, they both understood that their connection was something rare, something that would not be forgotten no matter what happened next. The ranch, which had once felt lonely, now felt full of life and meaning, and with Rusty at their side, The three of them felt like a small, gentle family brought together by fate. The next morning began with a soft, golden light spreading across the land. It touched the hills, the grass, and finally, the small ranch house where Jack, Nalina, and Rusty rested. The world looked peaceful, as if it wanted to hold the moment gently before the day truly began. But Jack knew that today would be different from the others. Today, Nalina would decide when to leave. Jack stepped outside with Rusty following behind him. The dog nudged Jack's leg, sensing his quiet worry. Jack placed a hand on Rusty's head and sighed softly. For days, the ranch had felt warm and alive, filled with a sense of calm because of Nalina's presence. Now he wondered how quickly that feeling would fade once she was gone. When Jack walked back inside, Nalina was awake. She sat at the small wooden table, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her face looked rested and peaceful, but her eyes carried a thoughtful weight. Rusty walked over to her as if greeting an old friend, and she smiled gently, touching his head. Jack prepared a simple breakfast, and they ate quietly. There was warmth in the air, but there was also something unspoken, a gentle sadness that both of them felt, but neither wanted to mention too soon. After breakfast, Nalina stepped outside for fresh air. Jack walked beside her. Rusty followed closely, weaving between them as if trying to keep them connected. Nalina breathed deeply, taking in the wide open land, the blue sky, and the gentle breeze brushing against her face. "It is a beautiful day," she said softly. Jack nodded. "It is, but beauty sometimes made difficult moments feel even heavier." They walked slowly toward the fence that overlooked the far hills. Nalina stood there quietly for a long time. Jack watched her, noticing her calm posture, the way the sunlight touched her hair, the thoughtful expression on her face. She looked stronger now, physically and emotionally. She was no longer the exhausted traveler who had arrived leaning on Rusty for support. She was steady, grounded, and ready to continue her journey. Finally, she turned to Jack. "My people will be worried. I need to return soon." Jack felt the words sink deep into his chest, but he nodded respectfully. He knew it was true, but knowing it did not make it easier. Rusty barked softly, almost as if asking her not to go. Nalina knelt down and stroked his fur. "You saved me," she whispered to him. "I will always remember you." Her voice trembled just a little. When she stood up again, Jack noticed how her eyes glistened with emotion. She looked at him gently. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. Your kindness will stay with me always." Jack lowered his gaze for a moment. "Anyone would have done the same," he said quietly. "No," Nalina replied, shaking her head. "Not everyone. The world is wide, but kindness is not always found easily." Her words made Jack look up again. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was understanding, gratitude, and something deeper, something neither of them knew how to express fully. Nalina continued softly. "You live alone, Jack, but you have a good heart. You have a home filled with peace, even if you do not always see it." Jack swallowed, feeling his throat tighten a little. "It hasn't felt peaceful for a long time," he said honestly. "Not until you and Rusty walked through that field." A gentle sadness passed over Nalina's features, but there was warmth there too. "Sometimes people cross paths for reasons we do not understand. Maybe I was meant to find your dog. Maybe I was meant to find your home." Jack stepped closer, unsure of his words. "You can stay longer if you want. There's no rush." Nalina smiled softly. "A part of me wishes I could. But my people need me, and I have promises to keep." She paused. "I must return." Jack nodded slowly. He had expected this, yet the finality of her words still felt heavy. Rusty moved between them, sensing the tension. He nudged Jack's leg, then Nalina's, as if asking for a different answer. Something happier. They both smiled slightly at Rusty's innocent hope. Throughout the morning, Nalina prepared herself to leave. She folded the blanket she had used. She checked the small bag she carried, making sure everything was in place. Jack saddled one of his calmer horses for her, adjusting the straps with extra care. He wanted to make sure her journey would be safe and steady. When it was time to mount the horse, Nalina hesitated. She looked around the ranch, taking in every detail: the barn, the porch, the open fields, the small windmill turning slowly in the breeze. It was clear that the place had touched her heart just as she had touched Jack's. She turned to Jack. "This place gave me strength. And so did you." Jack felt something warm rise inside him. "I'm glad you came," he said simply. She nodded. Then she reached into her bag and took out a small woven bracelet made of thin fibers, decorated with tiny beads. She held it out to Jack. "This is for you," she said gently. "A reminder of our paths crossing, a reminder of kindness." Jack looked at the bracelet, surprised. It was delicate and beautiful, clearly made with care. He accepted it slowly, feeling its meaning far beyond its small size. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll keep it safe." Nalina smiled warmly. "It carries blessings. Wear it when you feel alone." Jack nodded, unable to find words for a moment. Rusty stood beside Nalina, tail low, eyes fixed on her. She bent down and hugged him gently. "You are a brave friend," she whispered. "Do not forget me." Rusty whined softly, licking her hand. Finally, Nalina mounted the horse. Jack stood beside them, resting his hand on the saddle for a last moment. She looked down at him, her eyes calm but filled with emotion. "May your days be peaceful," she said softly. "And yours," Jack replied. With a light movement, Nalina guided the horse forward. She rode slowly at first, turning once to look back. Jack raised a hand. Rusty barked, tail wagging, as if giving her a final farewell. Nalina smiled, then continued riding toward the horizon. Each step carried her farther away, until her figure became small, then smaller, until finally she disappeared behind a gentle rise in the land. Jack stood there for a long time, watching the path she had taken. Rusty sat beside him, silent and thoughtful in his own way. The ranch felt quiet again, but not empty. Something had changed inside Jack, something peaceful, something warm. He looked down at the bracelet in his hand. It felt like a promise, a reminder that kindness and connection could find a place even in the loneliest corners of the world. Jack walked back to the house with Rusty at his side. The wind blew softly, carrying a calm sound across the land. The sky stretched wide above him, full of light. For the first time in years, Jack did not feel alone. He felt grateful for Rusty, for Nalina, and for the moment fate allowed their paths to cross. He placed the bracelet carefully on his wrist, touched Rusty's head, and whispered softly, "Thank you, boy. You brought her to me." Rusty wagged his tail, and together, man and dog returned to their quiet home, a home that now carried memories that would remain forever gentle, forever meaningful, and forever alive in their hearts.